Hey, have you seen my cup? Did you take it? I left it right here on my desk. I don't know what happened to it. I left it right here. I mean, come on, cups just don't disappear. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake Fantasy Headliners. Hope you guys are all doing well out there. Welcome to Week 11 Fantasy Football. Talking about them ball catchers in this episode. The wide receiver position starts and sits for Week 11. Who can we trust and maybe who can we not? A little bit of craziness that happened into Week 10, and we're going to get into it here in just 1 second to see how we did in Week 10. However, before we do that, just a reminder, don't pay too much attention to just the column that these players are in. Listen to the information. That's what's going to help you make a better decision on Sunday. Remember, these are your teams. We're not telling you to do anything. We're supplying information and letting you make the choice. That's how you become more involved in a better fantasy football team owner. That's what it's all about. But now, without talking about anything else, let's go see how we did in Week 10 for the wide receiver position. All right, for Week 10 for the wide receiver position, a pretty solid week overall. We had a total of 53 players that we gave a start or sit designation to. Out of those 53 players, 34 of them were correct for an accuracy percentage of 64%. Some of our biggest hits: Tyler Boyd had him as a sit last week. He once again underperformed. Juju was a very tough sit for a lot of people that drafted him early. However, he underperformed also, was a correct call of a sit. Robert Woods, we had him as a start last week. A lot of people did not agree with that call. However, had himself his best game in quite a while. Jarvis Landry, somebody else who the people have kind of been on the fence about, but has continued to put together a string of a couple solid games. Marquise Hollywood Brown, said it in last week's episode that this guy was due for a big play touchdown. He got it last week. He was a hit. Some of our misses: yes, Cooper Kupp decided to not really play football apparently last week. At least Jared Goff didn't think he was playing football. A big goose egg for Cooper Kupp. Deebo Samuel, he really benefited from Emmanuel Sanders leaving early and no George Kittle. Had himself a great day. Darius Slayton finally broke out from just being a touchdown-dependent wide receiver. Randall Cobb was really involved in the offense for the Dallas Cowboys, and James Washington kind of rekindled that college love with Mason Rudolph because they really connected better this past week. Had James Washington had a huge game. Now, going into Week 11, there's a few bye weeks that we have to worry about. There's some matchups that we really don't like. Given the roster that you have, you may not have better options. We don't know your league size. We don't know injuries. All that other type of stuff that goes into making these decisions. But there's some names that we're really not too fond of here this week. So now, let's get into all the matchups for Week 11, talk some wide receivers. Steelers and Browns up now, and we need some help from some big names in this game. And we're going to start off with Pittsburgh and Juju Smith-Schuster, who has only 6 catches for 60 yards combined over his last 2 games. Now, one great thing to see, he's not solely on the outside. He's getting an opportunity in the slot also. The problem is, they're really not giving him a lot of targets. He does not have one game all year long where he's seen double-digit targets. And to be the number 1 wide receiver, one of the best wide receivers in football, to not have at least seen double-digit targets once is a little bit concerning. But right now, the Cleveland secondary is a little bit more vulnerable from the slot than they are from the outside. So Juju can thrive in this game. So far this season, Cleveland has allowed 3 slot wide receivers to put up top 24 numbers from the wide receiver position. That's what we're kind of targeting here this week. I can see Pittsburgh moving him around the field, get him in the slot, and if he can make something happen, he's only one big play away from really helping your fantasy day. I like Juju this week, and I'm actually going to throw him back into the start column. Now, for Deontay Johnson, he's only seen double-digit fantasy points 1 time out of his last 5 games, and we really need to see another solid performance for James Washington before I just trust throwing him in the game. Yes, he looked great with Mason Rudolph last week, but there's a chance that he could struggle here this week on the outside, going up against either Greedy Williams or Denzel Ward. These are definitely tough matchups for him, and I want to see a little bit more consistency before we trust it. So both those guys go into the sit column. Now for Cleveland, Baker said it last week that he's going to make an effort to get the ball to Odell Beckham. And he did. I mean, didn't really, amount to a whole lot, but Beckham saw a season-high 12 targets last week, which is a great sign. I mean, he's only had 5 receptions 1 time this year since week 4. He's gone 7 games without a touchdown, but look at some of his recent matchups. Yes, I know a lot of people want to gang on top of the Browns and tell everybody how much they suck and how much they've underperformed. I get that. But the last 3 games that he's played, he's gone up against Stephon Gilmore, Chris Harris, and Tre'Davious White, 3 of the best defensive backs in all of football. He may be lining himself up for a solid second half of the year starting this week. Not an easy matchup, but a matchup in which that he can, take advantage of some of this extra volume if he gets it. Now, for Jarvis Landry, he's been a little bit safer in this offense here as of late, which a lot of people don't want to agree with either, but that's okay. He's had 3 straight games with double-digit targets and touchdowns in back-to-back games. Right now, he has the safer floor between the 2 of them. I'm fine with both of them this week. Jarvis Landry, more of a flex play, wide receiver 3, but Odell Beckham, kind of in that same area, a wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 2, but has that super high ceiling on any given week, especially with Cleveland going back home in Cleveland, trying to get some type of momentum here to close out the season. I'll start both Landry and Beckham. Falcons and Panthers up now, and for the Falcons, obviously Julio Jones, despite being somewhat hit or miss over the last few weeks, he's still a must start. And now there's no Devontae Freeman, there's no Austin Hooper in this Atlanta offense. What does that mean? More targets going the way of Julio Jones and even Calvin Ridley to see some added targets in this offense. Right now, Carolina allows 22.5 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. This matchup is lining up perfectly to maybe see some big plays go the way of Julio and Calvin. I like them both this week. They're both going to be starts. For Carolina, DJ Moore has had 8+ targets 7 out of his 9 games played this season. He's had 5 receptions in every game since week 4. Right now, Atlanta, they allowed the 7th most fantasy points in the NFL to opposing wide receivers at 26.8 points per game. I mean, that kind of gives Curtis Samuel a solid start also. He may not see the volume that DJ Moore gets on a weekly basis. However, the touchdown upside is really there for Curtis Samuel. He has 4 touchdowns in his last 4 games played. Both of these guys have upside, and if they can score points and move the ball in Atlanta, Carolina is going to be forced to throw the ball. Insert DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel could have themselves another solid wide receiver 2 flex play type of day here in Week 11. Cowboys and Lions up next, and this is where I may have a few people disagree, but that's okay. This is just supplying a little bit of perspective. This matchup, especially for the Detroit Lions, really dependent on the status of Matthew Stafford. Now, more than likely, he's going to miss Week 11. He's not officially ruled out yet, but it sounds like he probably will be out once again. That makes Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones really touchdown dependent in this offense. And the Dallas secondary is pretty dang good. Right now, against opposing fantasy wide receivers, they only give up 15.5 fantasy points per game. That's second best in the NFL. And like I said, Detroit's going to have to throw the ball in this game, right? There's not much of a resemblance of a run game there, so the opportunities should be there for both Golladay and Jones. The targets may be there, but are they catchable targets? That's something you really have to pay attention to. Yeah, they may be seeing the volume, but if the ball's over their head or in the dirt, it's not really something that can benefit them. Now, am I saying that I hate both of these guys and absolutely no way I'm starting them? No, I'm not. It really depends on the options you have on your team. You may not have better options, and Kenny Golladay has proven to be a solid, consistent fantasy, producer on a weekly basis if you do need somebody. However, the risk is there. You may not want to take that risk depending on what other risks you already have in your lineup. Just keep that in mind going into the weekend. Now, for Dallas, we're going to continue to roll out Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. Now, a lot of people want to complain about Zeke not having a huge year. And what does Zeke have to do with Cooper and Gallup? Well, it's still Ezekiel Elliott and the Dallas Cowboys, and the defense has to pay attention to the running game. They have to keep defenders in the box. That gives, Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper a lot of one-on-one coverage on the outside. And so far this season, they've proven that they can take advantage of that one-on-one coverage. They're both seeing double-digit targets. At least they did last week in Week 10, so we know that's a possibility on a week-to-week basis. And Detroit gives up, on average, just over 23 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Both of these guys back in the start column here, Week 11. Jags and Colts up next, and Nick Foles back under center for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But who the heck is he going to throw the ball to? We really don't know who he's going to prefer in this offense. I mean, is it going to be DJ Chark still? Does Chris Conley get more opportunities? Heck, does Dede Westbrook come back and lead this wide receiving group? Nobody really knows for sure. Now, as of right now, DJ Chark is probably still the highest rated wide receiver of this trio, but he's still super touchdown dependent. And I know people hate to hear that, but you know what? Sometimes the truth hurts. The guy has yet to post a double-digit fantasy day if he hasn't scored a touchdown. Now, a lot of people can say, well, yeah, obviously, touchdowns really help score those double digits. Yeah, I get that. But I'm only talking about 8 catches for 60 yards, gives you 10 fantasy points in half-point PPR leagues, and he's yet to do anything like that so far this season. Hence the reason he's touchdown dependent. But really, the biggest X factor here is Dede Westbrook. Does he come back and take away targets that have gone towards Chark and Conley here the past few weeks? Entirely possible. Until we see how this offense runs with Nick Foles, I'd really prefer to avoid everybody. If I'm taking a stab on anybody, though, it's DJ Chark and that big play ability. However, that risk is there here this week going up against a Colts secondary, which is not bad. They're a middle-of-the-pack pass defense here in the NFL. So DJ Chark as a risky play, Dede Westbrook and Chris Conley, just somebody we need to watch here this week to see how this offense moves going forward. Now, for the Colts, they should also have their quarterback back also, Jacoby Brissett. Now, what they may not have is T.Y. Hilton, who is still not practicing and may not play again this week. However, if he does practice, if he plays, he's back in your starting lineup. So really the only guy to talk about for the most part is Zach Pascal, who's kind of been hit or miss as of late. It is definitely better that Jacoby Brissett is back there playing quarterback for Zach Pascal. Now, the Jaguars give up on average just over 21 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, so not a horrible matchup. Now, if Hilton plays this week, Zach Pascal has some flex upside, not huge upside, but it does have that flex appeal. If Hilton sits, there's going to be more targets going the way of Zach Pascal, and now all of a sudden he becomes somebody who I'm a little bit more comfortable with starting as my flex spot here, my wide receiver 3 in Week 11. Outside of that, though, not a whole lot of other pass-catching weapons. Yes, I know, Devin Funchess, #Never Funchess may be coming back. I don't care, especially not this week. That's something we'll look at in the future. However, that hashtag has been on this show for 3 years, and it's not changing now. Bills and Dolphins up next, and I know I'm not overly excited to talk about or watch this game either, but there may be a fantasy viable option that we need to take a look at. For the Dolphins, it's probably not going to be #fantasy Bigfoot Devontae Parker. There may be a sighting of him this week. I mean, the volume should be going his way. No more Preston Williams on the opposite side, but he's more than likely going to be matched up with Tre'Davious White of the Buffalo Bills, one of the top defensive backs in all of football. He's shut down Odell and Terry McLaurin over the past couple weeks. And as a whole, the Buffalo Bills secondary is shutting down opposing wide receivers, giving up on average only 15.8 fantasy points per game, third best in the NFL. I'm not really risking it with Devontae Parker this week, despite these teams just playing a few weeks ago back in Week 7, where Parker had 5 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. I'm not overly excited just to bank on the fact that he does that again. I'm going to sit everybody for the Miami Dolphins. Now, for the Buffalo Bills, I mean, you really have John Brown and Cole Beasley to talk about. Now, John Brown coming into the year, a lot of people, myself included, thought he would be involved more in the deep ball, the deep passing game, but Josh Allen has just been too inconsistent getting the ball deep down the field. But as far as consistency go, that's kind of what John Brown has been all season long. He's seen at least 5 receptions in 7 out of 9 games played. He's had no less than 8 fantasy points in a game so far this season. He had one of his best games of his entire season when they played back in Week 7, where he had 5 catches, 83 yards, and a touchdown. And Cole Beasley kind of just remains to be one of these touchdown-dependent wide receivers, which is really crazy to think about because he's not that style of wide receiver. You would expect him to rack up a lot of receptions, but right now, he's only averaging 3 receptions a game in his last 5 weeks. I mean, he had a touchdown back in Week 7 also, but only had 16 yards receiving in that game. I'll roll out John Brown and that consistency before I roll out Cole Beasley and that touchdown dependency on a weekly basis. So right now, give me John Brown of the Buffalo Bills. Texans and Ravens up now, and of course you're going to start DeAndre Hopkins, right? I mean, he's coming off the bye week. He's well rested. He's had 5 straight games with at least 12 fantasy points in half-point PPR leagues. He's had 4 straight games with over 11-plus targets. And like I said, he should be well rested coming off the bye week. But after that, there's a lot of risk, a lot of big play risk, because it sounds like Will Fuller will be back in the mix. So what does that do to Kenny Stills? They both kind of play the same type of role in this offense. Unless you're, desperate for bye week fill-ins or injury replacements, I'm not overly excited to start either one of these guys. They are both very boom or bust in this offense, especially with the way that Baltimore's defense has been playing here the past few weeks. Yes, for the season, it says that they allow 22 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. But the way they've been playing on the field and the confidence that they're going to come into this game with, this is not a defense that I really want to tempt too much. DeAndre Hopkins stays in my lineup. But unless you're desperate for a flex play in deeper leagues, I'm not going to touch Fuller or Stills until I can see which one of these guys really solidifies himself as the number 2 option in Houston. Now for Baltimore, it's really just Marquise Hollywood Brown to talk about. And so far this season, 11 wide receivers have posted at least 14.9 PPR fantasy points going against Houston. That's the most in the NFL. And what is every defense going to try to do to the Baltimore Ravens? They need to try to, shut down the running game. I mean, the way that the Baltimore Ravens control the clock and run the ball, no team can touch them unless they limit and stop the run. How do you do that? You put more players, more defenders into the box, giving more one-on-one coverage on the outside, more big play potential for Marquise Brown, and he's definitely going to be a start for me this week. He has that big play potential. He flashed it last week, and I can see him doing it again here in Week 11. Broncos and Vikings up now, and it sounds like we may be without Adam Thielen once again this week for the Minnesota Vikings, and if that's the case, I'm off the bandwagon, hopping off the bus of Stephon Diggs. Why? That means he'll be matched up with Chris Harris of the Denver Broncos, who's been one of the best defensive backs in all of football this year, shutting down some of the best wide receivers in football. He's allowed one big play all year long, and that was to Tyreek Hill. Outside of that, he has shut down some of the best wide receivers, Odell Beckham, Devontae Adams. He has played great this season, and this is not one of those defensive backs that I really want to tempt, especially when we've already seen struggles from Diggs at times, especially over the past couple weeks. The Denver Broncos defense only allows 18.2 fantasy points per game as is to opposing wide receivers, which is 8th best in the NFL. To me, this is just not one of those weeks that I want to tempt fate with Stephon Diggs, so I'm going to pass on him here if at all possible in Week 11. For Denver, I still really like Courtland Sutton. I mean, he's making spectacular catches. He's making Brandon Allen probably look a little bit better than he is. Some of these catches, there's not a lot of wide receivers in the NFL that could make these plays. However, he's had double-digit fantasy points 7 out of his 9 games played, and now he's had another week with Brandon Allen to try to get some more chemistry in this offense. Coming off the bye week, should have a little bit more of an opportunity. He's a solid wide receiver 2 here once again, with Minnesota allowing on average 26.3 fantasy points per game. Xavier Rhodes is no longer one of those shutdown cornerbacks that you really try to avoid. I'm going to start Courtland Sutton here for the Denver Broncos. Jets and Redskins now, and another one of those games that I'm not overly excited to watch or talk about. However, Jamison Crowder has shown some life here the past few weeks. He's had 13 receptions, 164 yards, and 2 touchdowns over his last 2 games combined. And the Redskins give up over 23 fantasy points per game, but there's nobody else really on the Jets that I'm interested in really starting. Robbie Anderson absolutely disappeared. Right now, he's averaging less than 3 receptions a game and only has 1 touchdown on the season. Demaryius Thomas, a little bit safer of a floor. He's not going out there and absolutely killing fantasy teams, but there's no ceiling there because he has yet to have a touchdown here in 2019. In my opinion, Jamison Crowder is the only option for the wide receiver position here for the New York Jets. For the Redskins, it's really just Terry McLaurin to talk about, and I hate to say it, but with Dwayne Haskins under center, it kind of limits some of the upside of Terry McLaurin on a weekly basis. These guys should have chemistry. They played college ball together. It's not like they're, foreign to playing with each other. And right now, the Jets allow 28.5 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, which is second most in the NFL. They're coming off the bye week. Hopefully they had some time to get some added chemistry. It's a great matchup. Terry McLaurin has seen at least 6+ targets in all but one game this season. It's a gamble, but it's a gamble that I'm willing to take this week in a great matchup in hopes that Terry McLaurin can find the end zone once again. I'm going to start him here in week 11. Saints and Bucks up next, and Michael Thomas is definitely somebody who's going to be in your starting lineup. You don't need me to tell you that. I would start him if you were playing quarterback at this point. It doesn't really matter. I said back in the preseason that I believe that Michael Thomas was the safest option of all of the top wide receivers in your fantasy draft, and so far it's somewhat holding true. He's already over 1,000 yards receiving, double-digit targets in 7 out of 9 games, and now a matchup against Tampa Bay. Yes, thank you. I'll take it all day long because the Bucks give up on average 32.5 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. Love Michael Thomas. Now, it would not surprise me if we see one of those big plays go to Ted Ginn this week. However, he just hasn't seen consistent enough volume or enough production on a weekly basis to trust going into your lineup at this point. He hasn't had more than 2 receptions in a game since week 1, so give me Michael Thomas, but that's it for the Saints. For Tampa Bay, kind of obvious also, right? Evans and Godwin, you have them, you're starting them. They're both closing in on 1,000 yards themselves. There is no Marshawn Lattimore for the New Orleans Saints. That only helps these two out because that's one less person on the defensive side of the football that they have to worry about. These are 2 tough run defenses. The run games could struggle. That would lead to more passing, some possible fireworks, some possible big days between the Saints and the Bucks. Love these guys here, week 11. Cardinals and 49ers up next, and deep down inside as an Arizona fan, being that I was born and raised there, I really don't like the idea of the Cardinals going to San Francisco after the loss that they just suffered on Monday Night Football. I mean, these two teams just played 2 weeks ago, and Fitz and Christian Kirk were really held in check. San Francisco only allows, on average, 17.5 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, which is 5th best in the NFL. But Christian Kirk, coming off of a career game where last week he had 6 receptions, 138 yards, 3 touchdowns. However, it was against that Tampa Bay defense that we just referenced here not that long ago. He has double-digit targets, though, in 2 of the 3 games since returning from injury. He has risk, has a lot of risk this week, but he does have some deeper league flex potential just based off of the volume he should see. The ceiling is going to be limited. I like him a lot more if it's a full-point PPR matchup. In my opinion, still a little bit safer than Larry Fitzgerald, who seems to kind of disappear at times in this offense. They may try to establish a running game early like they did, the last time they played with Kenyon Drake. A lot of risk here with Christian Kirk, but if you're in a deeper league looking for a flex spot, I don't hate it. Now for San Francisco, how healthy is Emmanuel Sanders? Now at the time of this recording, literally right before I started this, I looked down at my phone and it says that George Kittle is going to be out this week. That changes things a little bit also. That really boosts the value of Deebo Samuel. Look what he did in this offense last week with no Emmanuel Sanders and no George Kittle. We saw a lot of Deebo Samuel. So now we need to watch the practice reports. Let's see if Emmanuel Sanders plays. If he's out, Deebo Samuel becomes an automatic must start. If Sanders plays, Samuel still has some value, more flex play, deeper leagues, because George Kittle is going to be out. Something we definitely need to pay attention to because when these two teams played just 2 weeks ago, Emmanuel Sanders tore up this defense, 7 catches, 112 yards, and a touchdown. Right now, all reports saying that Arizona allows right around 23.7 fantasy points per game, which is 11th most in the NFL. So we need to watch those practice reports because whoever is out there to catch the ball probably needs to be someone we need to consider here for Week 11. Bengals and Raiders up next in Week 2 of the Ryan Finley experiment here for the Cincinnati Bengals. Now last week, Tyler Boyd saw 8 targets, which he turned into 6 receptions for 62 yards. Not a horrible fantasy day. However, still no touchdowns since Week 5. This is a much better matchup this week, though, going up against the Oakland Raiders, who allow, on average, 27.8 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That's 3rd most in the NFL. We know there's no A.J. Green, and Auden Tate has kind of regressed ever since they've benched Andy Dalton. I'm really looking for a bounce-back week for Tyler Boyd. I've had him as a sit on this show for a few weeks. This may be one of those games, though, where he comes out and has some solid fantasy production and that you don't mind having him in your lineup. Now, for the Oakland Raiders side of things, we really only talk about Tyrell Williams weekly, but once the touchdown stopped for Tyrell Williams, so did the fantasy production for the most part. Over his last 2 games combined, 6 catches, 73 yards, 10 total fantasy points and half-point PPR scoring. Now with Tyrell Williams, Hunter Renfrow, Zay Jones, Darren Waller, balls to the Waller. I mean, they're just splitting so many targets that on a weekly basis, none of these guys are really standing out above the others. Cincinnati's pass defense is not horrible. This is going to be another one of those games, though, where Tyrell Williams is really touchdown dependent. It can happen this week. I mean, we saw last week, Marquise Brown get loose against this secondary of the Cincinnati Bengals. Can Tyrell Williams do the same thing? There's a lot of risk involved. You may not have a choice, and if you're looking for somebody as a wide receiver 3 or flex play, Tyrell Williams isn't a horrible option. Just going to avoid him if I have better choices on my bench. Pats and Eagles up next, and as long as Tom Brady's playing quarterback for the New England Patriots and Julian Edelman is an option, he's going to be in the start column. The guy's usage is just going to continue to be through the roof. He's seen 9+ targets, 7 out of 9 games played. However, don't forget about Mohamed Sanu. The game before the bye week, he posted 10 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown. Back there in week 9, he's definitely somebody who's going to be involved in this offense. And Philadelphia allows 27.4 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That's 6th most in the NFL. The Patriots, coming off the bye week, had time to prep for this game, and they're also coming off a loss, their first loss of the year to the Baltimore Ravens. Not exactly the best time to play the New England Patriots. However, it's a great opportunity for both Edelman and Sanu here this week. For Philadelphia, it's really just Alshon Jeffrey, and he's already dealing with an ankle injury and may not be 100%. Nelson Agholor going up against this New England defense who only allows 12.7 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers is not ideal either way, even if Alshon was 100% healthy. Both of these guys I'm avoiding here in Week 11. It's just not worth the risk going up against this Patriots defense. Bears and Rams up next, and yes, the ever-changing offense of the Chicago Bears. Now you have Allen Robinson, but more than likely he's going to be shadowed by Jalen Ramsey. And then you have Taylor Gabriel, who's probably the next best option in this passing offense that is really touchdown dependent. I mean, at times, Mitch Trubisky at quarterback looks like he's never played the position before, and Matt Nagy looks like he may have never called a play in his life at certain times. This is just one of those offenses that's really hard to figure out. Right now, the Rams allow just over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. But with Allen Robinson locked down by Jalen Ramsey and the touchdown dependency of Taylor Gabriel, this may not be a risk I'm willing to take. Right now, Allen Robinson has only seen double-digit fantasy point production 3 out of the 9 games he's played so far this year. I'm not taking the risk on either one of these guys for Chicago. Now, on the Rams side of things, I mean, what the heck? Cooper Kupp. I mean, I had no idea that dude was playing, Houdini for Halloween because he absolutely disappeared last week. 0 catch, nothing for Cooper Kupp last week. I mean, he was gone, not involved anywhere. I think he saw like 4 targets, didn't bring any of them in. I can't see that happening again, though. This offense and that wide receiver are too good to be shut out on back-to-back days. Obviously, he's still an elite option. No Brandon Cooks, but Chicago only allows, on average, 16 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, which is 4th best in the NFL. However, I'm still starting Cooper Kupp. And Robert Woods is still somebody who I wouldn't mind starting as a flex option either. More than likely, if you're dealing with those injuries or bye weeks, you may need a filler, and Robert Woods saw the most targets last week that he's seen since week 4. He's definitely a flex option and somebody that could, provide solid production here, especially in full-point PPR leagues if you're looking for a wide receiver as a bye-week fill-in or injury replacement. All right, Monday Night Football, we got the Chiefs and the Chargers down in Mexico. That's right, Ciudad de Mexico, Monday Night Football, Chiefs and Chargers. Now, finally, we had somewhat of a solid game from Keenan Allen. Back in Week 10, he had 8 receptions for 68 yards. Not a huge game, but better than he had been producing. He's seen double-digit targets 3 out of the last 4 games he's played, and this could be one of those games where they're forced to throw all 4 quarters to keep pace with the Kansas City Chiefs. Mike Williams, still a decent flex option. I mean, he's seen at least 7 fantasy points each week since Week 5. So he has a solid floor. The ceiling just hasn't been there because he's not scoring touchdowns. Could this be the week that he gets in the end zone? Quite possibly. The Chiefs only allow on average just over 18 fantasy points per game, which is 7th best in the NFL, but both of these guys, in my opinion, worth a start on Monday Night Football. For Kansas City, though, it's really only Tyreek Hill. I mean, he's the safest option in this offense, unless you're in a really deep league, a PPR-based league, and then maybe you can take a look at Sammy Watkins because he's had 27 targets over the last 3 games. Outside of that, though, it's really just Tyreek Hill, who's a must-start. Sammy, a little bit more dependent on your needs and league size, but right now the Chargers allow, on average, right around 18 fantasy points per game, which is 6th best in the NFL. These two teams are fairly evenly matched on the defensive side of the football, but they're both going to be throwing the ball all 4 quarters. There could be some big points in this game. Give me Hill, Allen, and Williams in the start column. All right, those are all my starts and sits for the wide receiver position here, Week 11 fantasy football. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Maybe you have a differing opinion. That's okay. We shouldn't always agree, otherwise this show would be boring to watch. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, and we try to get to as many questions and comments as we possibly can. We greatly appreciate the support. Once again, if you're looking to help donate to the channel and help support the cause of Headliner Nation, there's a link down below in the description to our Patreon page. We would greatly appreciate anything that you're willing to do to help support this channel and this movement that we have going forward. Hopefully you have a great rest of your week. Good luck this weekend, and we'll talk to you later.